Welcome to the Dieku podcast with Garry Snow.
Hi, this is Garry Snow. Welcome to Dieku Games and our first introduction podcast. I'll be talking about who I am, my history with the game industry, and where we go from here. So, without further ado, a little bit about myself is that, as a young boy, probably around the time I was maybe 10, 11 years old, one of my friends brought in an old Dungeons and Dragons box. I had seen my older sister play with her friends a little bit, and it intrigued me, and I was immediately kind of hooked. I mean, I had grown up fantasizing about being a knight and Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, so it just all kind of made sense. So when I had the opportunity, the first thing I did is convince my parents to buy me the Red Box, the Basic Red Box, and that's where I started my RPG and Dungeons and Dragons world. So it was something that I've always enjoyed. I've carried it with me throughout my whole life, had some really good experiences with my friends over that time. And, as we graduated from the Basic Red Box and we saw the Gary Gygax advanced version, and advanced obviously means better, so we started to buy the books, the first cover books, and we'd all, as our group of, teenagers at that point, we would each buy one book, whether it's the Dungeon Master Guide or the Player's Handbook or Monster Manual, and then we'd eventually graduate to the gradient covers, which I thought were always really well done. But we played with that for a number of years, and great summers, great evenings, great weekends, and couldn't have asked for a better activity as a kid growing up. And so we, as we got older and we all started getting our jobs, we started to really invest into the world of what Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games that were coming online at that time were offering. So, we had some people that were really into second edition. We had other people that were really into Robotech and the Palladium Games of the Ninja Turtles. And actually, I quite enjoyed, I know Palladium's got a bit of a bad rap, but I quite enjoyed that whole system, primarily when it came to heroes. And this is leading into Dieku Games a little bit, so it's a bit of a precursor to where we're heading at now in Dieku Games. But I really enjoyed the Palladium Heroes game, but as I'll discuss in a little bit, the elements of hero games in general are kind of problematic, but I'll cover that in a little bit. And then there's Palladium Rifts, which I really enjoyed. And it's that whole multiverse that they really pitch, that you can use different genres all kind of mashed up, which I always really, really appreciated. It gives you a little bit of everything, and you can decide as a game master what you want to do with those characters or settings. And, at that point, my mind was always racing with, how could I make my own system? I loved finding kind of books in either thrift stores, or I'd go to conventions and buy in the auction, GURPS or Traveler was a favorite of ours, kind of one of those breaks from the regular Dungeons and Dragons. We'd play Traveler. I bought Gamma World. With that said, never played it. Other games that kind of fall into that category were Boot Hill and Gangbusters, TSR games that I really thought, boy, this is interesting. I like to see how they kind of make the rules work. And I'll have to say that the rules kind of never really stood out as anything special, but I like the genre settings. And like I said, I really played around with making my own games and settings, and was always making notes and thinking about how I would actually design games. And, it went on to, I bought all the Gazetteers, and it was a bit of a throwback to the basic sets. And I had the Expert and Masters, and I think it might have been Immortal after that. I can't quite recall. But the reason I can't recall is because I ended up getting married, having kids, having a career, and having 3 bins of old Dungeons and Dragons games didn't really make a lot of sense. So I ended up selling those.
As sad as it was to get rid of those games in those 3 bins, I do feel they probably went on to help somebody get into the systems that were in there. So I can't totally regret that. But I would periodically dip back into the gaming world, and I'd always go, I wonder if this is the time. The first one was when D20 and the open gaming license happened. And it kind of excited me that, what used to be insurmountable to start your own game seemed a little bit more feasible. However, with that said, time being what it was and me not having a lot of it, I tended to pass on that. And I also, wasn't 100% sold on the D20 system in general. And there's a part of me that always went, you know what, something could be better. It seems always a little bit clunky. And that's no slight against the designers of that, because, time goes on and things change and things adapt. And I actually ended up missing out on the whole transition to more story-driven games. Now, this is also going to sound a little bit harsh, but for me, since returning into the gaming world and seeing the story games, I have to say I'm just not a huge fan of them. That when you feel that the results are determined, there's no risk to your players to not achieve their goal, and it's more of a improv setting than actual gaming. Like it's basically people sitting around telling stories, rolling dice to see how successful they are in the story, but ultimately the story is predetermined and it's more of an improv night. And so for me, to each their own. That's never been something that I was interested in. But more recently, probably within the last 2 or 3 years, in the OSR movement, and that really struck me. And I've seen like a lot of interesting developments come that way. There's a lot of great resources out there. There's a lot of analysis of what makes a good gaming system. And I probably, as I go through my own journey, I would say that the gaming systems that I tend to gravitate towards are old school gaming. But with that said, I still really think that there's room to improve as far as trying to be more minimalistic and have rules that just kind of flow. And going back to when I saw the multiverse and GURPS and those types of systems, I've always in my head gone, I betcha something could be done there. So through Dieku Games, I'm attempting that, and I've done as much as I can in that direction. And I've had breakthroughs that I'll share in future podcasts as far as lessons that I've learned through that internal process that hopefully can be shared out with other people. But when I finally said, you know what, this is the time to do it. My career has been about marketing and graphic design and layout and creative pursuits and video and animation. That it's funny that my whole career has actually been leading up to this. So more recently, I finally decided that this was the time between OSR, my desire for a minimalist system, a game setting, which I'll talk about the Cities Grimm shortly, that I'd like to see come to fruition. And so for me, this is an exciting time. And the reason I chose Dieku Games, which is going back to that minimalist idea, the whole concept of being a minimal system. And as we all know, a haiku is a 3-line poem. Off the top of my head, I can't tell you how many syllables are on each line, but ultimately I kind of wanted to take that approach for role-playing games, where it was a minimalist system. And so that's what has been driving a lot of my creativity, and it feels pretty good. It has, I hope, an OSR kind of feel to it, but also hopefully advancing things. I've seen so many other people out there that are doing minimalist games, and tough to strike that balance of, you see some of these one-page games and they're kind of fun, and you go, okay, I really love how minimalist it is, but when you don't have too many rules, then it actually puts a lot more work on you running the game. So it's not actually helping. It's kind of more of a niche that, hey, it's a one-page RPG, but does it actually function? It's not for me to say, but others to judge. But for me, I've always said, I'm trying to find the right balance between complex rules and minimalist rules so that it's actually not a lot of work for people to use my games. So that's been kind of my approach on how I've been pursuing the whole Dieku games and how I'm designing games, both a minimalist system and then settings. So the first setting that I'm working on is called the Cities Grimm, and it's been a long journey. As I alluded to earlier, it was more about started off kind of superheroes, and I always had like more of a dark, old school, like Arkham Asylum, Batman, Gotham City kind of feel to it, but it still was set in modern times. And when I started in on finding something unique versus just regurgitating DC or Marvel, what I actually honed in on was there's a really interesting era that I've always admired from a storytelling perspective and a possibility perspective. And so the setting or the time frame of the Cities Grimm is 1935. It's kind of between the wars. It's after the worst of the dirty 30s and before World War II. And I'm sure everybody is familiar with watching Indiana Jones. And when you would, see the Nazis that were not in a wartime yet, but they were out there pursuing occult mysteries. It was just that whole era of there's still secrets out there in the world. There, lost civilizations, relics that were undiscovered. And then if you combine that era with some of the other interesting things of the golden age of superheroes and the evolving time of that, and Superman was essentially brand new or coming into its own. There was sci-fi written material like Doc Savage that was kind of a precursor to that, and which I think I'll probably end up devoting a whole podcast to Doc Savage at some point, because I do find that whole transition very, very interesting. But so between the occult, Indiana Jones, World War II lead up with Nazi Germany and spies, as well as, there's the reporters, there's an essence of gangbusters to it. And I always like the idea of gangbusters, love the Untouchables, but somewhat limited. You have your G-men and your gangsters, but if you throw that in there with the whole multiverse, to steal that from Rifts, where you have a lot of different settings and a lot of different ideas kind of coming together at one single point in 1935, that's, I think, what you'll see in the Cities Grimm, where it's a bit, dark, mysterious, X-Files, Casablanca, Indiana Jones, and the Untouchables all kind of mashed together, which I hope is a fairly exciting setting. So I'll be going way more into depth in that in the near future, but that's a bit of a teaser heading into it. The other thing, going back to the game systems, is that I really like the idea of playing with the game mechanics, and I will be starting up my own Patreon in the very near future, where it actually explores game systems more, and there will be opportunities for people to participate in designing those systems with different levels. And there's a couple minimalist games and games rule settings that will be part of the Patreon, and so I'm excited to launch that. And that's kind of like a little lab experiment Patreon site. It won't include the Cities Grimm content or very little of it, it's going to be more about minimalist systems. So kind of two little projects on the go is the Patreon minimalist game mechanic Patreon system, and then the Cities Grimm, which we hope, or when I say we, it's a kind of a royal we, it's me, essentially, at Dieku Games. I do everything from write to design to market, so it's kind of a one-man show, but I'll probably often use the term we quite a bit because I just kind of feel it makes sense when I say Dieku Games and the hope for the future of it. So I think that's it for now. All I can say is hope you enjoyed the podcast. You can always go visit us online at diekugames.com. There's a Facebook group or Facebook page for Dieku Games, Instagram, Twitter, Itch.io. We're kind of everywhere, so if you want to go say hi, feel free to join, follow, share. Always very much appreciated. Tell your friends, and if you think some of this might be of interest to them. And until the next episode, I hope you have a really good time. Thanks. Bye.